Hello again, welcome to this video. So we're going to continue on with our basic NavMesh AI. So in the last video we implemented a wander, so he picks random points within our bound box here and will randomly wander to them. And in this video we are going to essentially give him the ability to patrol an area. Let's get started. So we'll open up our AI motor script in Visual Studio. Okie dokie, so the first thing we want to do is, well, because we're working with a new state, we want to create a new section for it. Actually, before we do that, we'll actually, with our behavior state enum, we need to add an enum value for patrolling. So we'll do exactly that. So after wander, we'll add a comma, and I'm just going to call it this behavior patrol. So next we'll create a section in the inspector for the behavior for the patrol settings. So I just copied the header attribute for the wander, and I'm going to obviously change wander to patrol for patrol settings. So we'll need only two variables here for the patrolling. First, we'll need a list of the points that we are going to patrol between. So we'll do that by creating empty game objects. And then we'll have the player move between those objects and select them randomly or normally. So to do that, we will go first create a public, and this variable we have type transform, but we want this to be an array. So to make it an array, we open and close a set of square brackets immediately after the data type definition of the variable. And then we give it the name like usual. So I'm going to call this patrol points, like so. Now we'll need one more variable here, and like I just mentioned, we want to give the ability for the AI to navigate the patrol points in order, so like in the appropriate sequence, one after the other as they're listed, or we'll give it the ability to randomly choose them in no particular order and just sort of navigate more irrationally between them. So we'll just use a boolean for that, and so we'll create a public bool, and we'll call this, I'm going to call it random sequence, and I'm also going to give it a default value of false, because that's something that we want to turn on. So now that we've done that, we'll probably need to go and change our set state function so that we can set it to patrol essentially. So we know that if current state is not equal to S, then we're going to set it to S. And we don't, so if our current state is wander, we're going to do this. So we'll add an else if statement tagged on after that if, the previous if statement. And here we're going to say if current state is equal to behavior state dot patrol. And we'll open a set of coding brackets for that if statement. Now in here, we want to find the next patrol point and set that as our destination. So we're going to simply write a comment here that will just say go to next, or go to patrol point. We'll just say go to patrol point. Okay, so now we need to set up a function that will actually do this, that will go to the next patrol point. So underneath above on draw gizmos, but underneath our wander functions, we are just going to create a private void. And we'll call this go to next patrol point, right? We actually will need a parameter here, and it'll be of type boolean, and I'm just going to call it random. Now with parameters, you can actually set parameters to have a default value as well, which means that they're then optional parameters. So we're going to set the default value for this parameter equal to false. Then we'll open a set of coding brackets for the function. So what this means is that we don't actually need to send it a parameter for this, well, for this particular parameter. We don't need to send it a value unless we want it to be something other than the default value. So the default value is false. So if we want it to be true, then we will pass a value of true for this parameter. Otherwise, we don't need to pass it anything. Okay, well, we need to do a couple of things here. We need to do something if we want to find a random one. Otherwise, we need to just find the next one. So what we'll do is we'll say if random is equal to false, So if it's equal to false, then we want to go to next point. Else, otherwise we want to go to a random point, right? So what we're going to do is, we'll do this using target pos essentially. And we'll set target pos to whatever destination we need to patrol to, and then what we need to do is, so after this though, that if else check, we want to set the destination to the new target position, and of course we want to make sure the agent can move is not stopped. So I think we can actually probably create one function that will return a value based on whether it's going to be random or not. Yeah, we'll do that actually. So underneath the function we just wrote, we're going to create a new function, but it's not going to have no return type. It's going to have a return of vector 3. So we'll just call this get patrol point, I guess. And again, we'll give this another, we'll give this the same parameter, a boolean, which we'll call random, and give a default value of false. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do in here, again, we need to do different things depending on if random is true or not. So we'll do the default functionality for it. So if random first, so if random is equal to false, okay, well we need to check a couple of things first, right? Because we're working with target pos, and we don't set target position, like the default position for target pos is just 0, 0, 0. So we need to actually check if target pos is in its default position, right? So if target pos is equal to vector3.0, then we are simply going to return, we're going to return our patrol points, and now we want to access the very first index of the array. So we open a set of square brackets after patrol points. Now when counting like indexes in an array, it always begins at 0 rather than 1. So an array that has 5 elements inside it, each element will be referred to in ascending order or descending order as 0, 1, 2, 3, and the last one will be 4. The first one being 0 and the last one would be 4. So here we want to return 0 because that's the first point in the list. Now we need to return a vector 3, so we'll grab the position from the object in that array, which is of type transform, so we can just access the position easily. Now if our target position is not at the default position, then we need to do a bit more, because we need to basically figure out what the next waypoint is. We need to figure out if that waypoint is at the end of the list, or if were already at the end of the list, and if we were, we want to cycle back to the beginning. So we can do this using a for loop and a couple of checks within that. So to open a for loop, we literally just declare the keyword for, then open a set of parentheses. Inside the parentheses, we first need to declare the counter for the loop. So I'm going to count using, so we declare like a local temporary variable here for the purpose of counting. So my counter is going to be called I. It's going to be of the type integer, and it's going to start from 0. So after we've declared the counter for the for loop, we then need to declare like the conditions to count by. So we only want to keep looping through the for loop if I is less than patrol points dot length, right? So dot length will return the number of elements inside the array. So if there's 5 elements, it'll return 5. And we want to keep I less than that. So when we get to the last one, I will be 4. I will still be less than patrol points dot length, but when we get past that, it'll be equal to patrol points dot length. So this for loop will stop running. So then we basically add the increment amount at the end of the for loop condition. So once we've finished executing, we want to increment I by 1. So we'll just write I++. So now inside this for loop, we want to check if the patrol point that we're looping through is equal to the one that we are currently moving towards. So we want to, in other words, we want to find our current patrol point, right? So we can simply say if patrol points, so we're accessing the array, and then we're going to pass it our counter, which changes every time the for loop iterates. So after that, we want to access the position, and then we're going to compare it to target pos, because target pos is the variable we are going to be using to store our current positions. Now, in here, so we want to do a couple of things. This is where we detect, whether we need to loop back to the beginning of the array or not. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say if I plus 1 is greater than or equal to patrol points dot length, right? So we're getting the next index essentially, and then we're checking if it's equal to or greater than patrol points dot length, because we know that if it's equal to patrol points dot length, that the index is going to be one too many, because we only want to execute this when it's less than. So if it's larger or greater than patrol points dot length, then we want to return the very first index of patrol points. So dot position. Otherwise, so add an else statement to that. Otherwise, we want to return the next patrol point. So we can say return patrol points, and then we want to say our current patrol point plus 1. And of course, we need to return a position. So we'll say dot position. Now this is still returning an error because, with all of these code paths now return a value, but there's nothing that counters this if statement. So this returns a data type. So every potential pathway of execution for the code needs to return a value, whether that is null. It either has to be null or a vector 3. So this if statement doesn't have an else statement, and that's the other path essentially. So here we'll simply say, so else return patrol points, and then so this part here this is obviously this executes if random is equal to false. So in here we want to get a random patrol point. Now there's a handy little class called random that we can use, which contains lots of functionality for getting random values, and we want to access a function within this class called range. So that'll need a set of parentheses after it. Now inside range, we pass it first the minimum value to generate a number between, and then the maximum value. Now an important note here is that it will never select the absolute maximum value. It'll always return something in between. Like it could select the first one, but the minimum value, but it'll never select the absolute maximum value. So that's good. We can put 0 as the minimum value, then we need a comma, and then we want to pass patrol points dot length, right, as the maximum value. So we know that this number here will never actually be selected, only things between these numbers. So the first number and between or up to this number will be selected. So then outside of the brackets there, we simply want to say dot position, because we need to return a vector 3. Okay, now an important thing to note is that when this function executes and it gets to a line that returns, it won't execute the rest of the function. So once it gets here, it'll stop. It won't even worry about this part here. Now we need to return one other thing. So if we manage to get through this whole block of code and we don't return anything, we know that none of these conditions have essentially been met. So we need to return have a safety value to return just in case. Now where that's going to happen is basically underneath our else statement. We'll just say return and then target pos. So we're just going to grab our current position essentially if we manage to execute this whole function, or our current destination, sorry, if we manage to execute this whole function without actually you know, returning one of the other values, essentially. So now that we've done that, we want to scroll up to the go to next patrol point function. Now in here, underneath here, we can simply say we're going to set target pos equal to the return type of get patrol point, like so. And we are going to do the exact same thing here, except we're going to pass true as the parameter value. Now to finish this function, we first need to set the destination. So we'll say agent.set destination, and we want to set it to target pos because that's got our new target position. And to make sure our agent can move in case he's been stopped, we want to say agent.isStopped is equal to false. Next, we need to do one last thing. So we need to do a couple of last things. So the first thing we need to do is in our set state function, and what we're going to do is we just simply need to call go to next patrol point, which needs a boolean for, you know, whether it needs to be random or not. And we have a public function defined for that. So variable defined for that. We'll pass it random sequence, which will define whether we're going to a random patrol point or not. Now the last thing we have in here is we need an update to essentially figure out if we're close to the target, and if we are, we need to move. So we can actually say, all right, let's move this line here where this local variable, I'm going to cut that and I'm going to move it just outside of the if statement, but still in the update, because we're going to use this. Actually, you know what, we'll move this if statement as well outside of there, and let's just bring that back in to reformat. Cool. So now what we'll do is we just need to add an else if statement here, else if, and we want to check if current state is equal to behavior state.patrol, because at this point we know this is going to equal the distance between ourselves and our target position. And then if our target distance is less than our stopping distance, we're going to find a new target. So that's what we need to do here. So all we need to do here is say go to next patrol point, and again pass it random sequence, which could be true or false. And that should do us for the script. So we'll save that, and now we'll head back into Unity. Okay, so now I'm back into Unity. I will have my AI selected, and if we scroll down to the AI motor script, you can now see that we have a section for patrol settings, and we have an array in which we can drop a bunch of patrol points, and we have a boolean for random sequence. So all I need to do now is I'm going to create an empty game object in the hierarchy. I'm going to reset its transform. I'm going to rename this to patrol point, and I'm going to give it a visual indicator in the scene. So we'll click on this little drop down menu here, and I'm going to give it the red diamond. So now if we move our patrol point around and we'll select it, we'll go Control D to duplicate it, and we'll just create a couple of patrol points around here. Oops, I moved that one in the wrong place. There we go. Yeah, that should do it. I'm going to select all of them. First I'm going to select my AI, scroll down to motor settings, then we'll have to drag them in one by one. So I'm going to drag it in like so. Okay, so I have all my patrol points set now. Let's hit play and see. Oh, actually, first we need to set his initial state to patrol. So I'll hit play now, and let's see what happens. So that was his first one, that's his second one, his third one, the fourth one, and the fifth one. So now let's hit random, and you can see he's gone back to this one here. It's gone, yeah, so he's picking a random path now. I'll turn off random again, and let's just make sure he loops back to the first one. And he did. So that's the patrol behavior state. Relatively simple. In the next part of this series, or the next tutorial, we will cover having them chase a target. And if they lose sight of the target, they'll go back to their whatever their previous behavior was. Thanks for watching, and put it to good use.